As NATO-led troops begin to counter the Taliban takeover of villages around Kandahar, it's already becoming clear that many families will be displaced. Warned to stay in their homes by security forces, many residents have chosen instead to flee, joining an estimated 130,000 Afghans already forced to face the harsh reality of homelessness.
Yesterday, I came out from my village. The Taliban were there, and this morning I don't know what's going on. I just heard the noise of the fighting, and the fighting is still going on.
Well, eyewitnesses' accounts like that one are becoming increasingly common across Kandahar province. But where are those displaced by the violence able to go? Earlier, I put that question to Norine MacDonald, the president and founder of the Census Council, an international policy think tank.
I know the district very well where the fighting is. It's a beautiful little district with lots of small villages, but it's extreme poverty there. And there actually is no system in place for where displaced people go. There's no refugee camps. There's no system to provide them food, shelter, or emergency medical assistance. So the psychological effect on the local population is very dramatic.
I mean, there are reports of the Taliban encouraging, and that's probably one way of putting it, the local people to stay and fight with them by whatever means is being employed, I'm not sure. But how credible would you believe that to be?
Well, we've been hearing these stories now for months when we're doing our research and our interviews on the ground there, and it's quite clear that many families do feel forced and intimidated into having their boys fighting for the Taliban. And on top of it, the Taliban do pay. So you're really seeing a situation where the Taliban are able, through these types of intimidation, bring people over to their side and make them believe that they're going to be the victors in this battle. So it's a really serious battle for the hearts and minds of the Afghan population. And we're not really in that game. I mean, we've got a military problem down there. We obviously have a military intelligence problem down there, and we have an issue of psychological control. It's a nasty triangulation.
I was about to ask, what do you believe is the nature of the battle for hearts and minds on the part of NATO and the Afghan troops?
Well, the military there in the south, which is really British, American, and Canadian military that are fighting there, they're really doing a really remarkable job in very difficult circumstances against a homegrown insurgency. And it looks like there's a lot of dirty fighting ahead, but they're not sufficient troops to deal with this. That means they're going to have to resort to bombing these areas or allowing the Taliban to continue to control them. And that bombing leads to civilian casualties, which obviously turns the local population against the military. So it's a really vicious and nasty cycle that we're faced with there, and it goes back to a lack of sufficient troops on the ground.
And do you think that that is the sole reason for this, that redressing this or addressing that, the number of troops on the ground, would actually solve the problem? Break the cycle?
It wouldn't solve all of the problem. I mean, there's obviously a problem with counter-narcotics in the south. The opium industry is financing the Taliban, and there's a development and aid problem. So we really need to rethink and re-engineer the architecture of the approach in southern Afghanistan, because we haven't been able to get on top of this resurgent Taliban movement in the south with the current troop capacity and with the current approaches. So they have to really go back to the drawing table and come up with new architecture and a new approach to not only win militarily, but win the hearts and minds of the locals.
I mean, in terms of the opium industry that you mentioned, it's the harvest, the first harvest of the season is being taken around now. So that in itself is doubly destabilizing for those Afghans who depend on it, whether for a living, whether or not you know, people agree with it or not. It's destabilizing in a social sense.
Absolutely. I mean, opium's their only really crop opportunity in the south at the moment. And the United States-led and UK-administered counter-narcotics policy in the south, which has been entirely focused on forced poppy crop eradication, which means they're going into the fields just before harvest and plowing it up, leaving them no means to feed their family, has actually turned the locals against the international military. So that counter-narcotics strategy that the US and the UK are running in the south turns the locals against their own military. So, you know, we're undercutting our own efforts in the south, our own military efforts in the south, by this really dysfunctional counter-narcotics policy. They've got options. You know, we've recommended poppy for medicine. Let the Afghan farmers grow opium poppy for the medicine morphine. There's a global shortage. But the US and the UK have not taken up that opportunity, and as a result, they're undercutting their own military effort there.
Norine MacDonald.